Welcome back to the internet. So in the last video we had a full thread of just random stories, and we've got a whole lot more of those, so it's time for part 2. The story of how my mother reunited with her sister. My mother was born in a very far east of Russia. Her father was a survivor of the gulags, and she was raised in a small settlement that was mainly populated by ex-prisoners and their families. Before my grandfather married, he had survived a mine collapse, and while in recovery, had an affair with a nurse that produced a child. After being released and settling down with my grandmother, he had reached out and established contact with his daughter. They met a few times, and he even took my mother on a few occasions to meet her. She lived in a city 5,000 kilometers to the south. But eventually, once the government let them move, my mother's family moved across the country, and this being the times before cell phones and social media, they lost touch with my aunt. The last time my mother saw her, she was about 12 and my aunt was about 20. Fast forward about 17 years later. My mother is on the Moscow metro, taking my sister to music school. She sees a woman sitting across from her, and as she describes it, just felt a gravitational pull towards her. She began staring at her, trying to figure out why it feels like she knows this person. Suddenly, it clicks. And as the train pulls into my mother's stop, she gets up and grabs this woman and says, "Are you this boy's aunt, daughter of his grandfather? Get off the train with me now." And lo and behold, her intuition was right. And that's how, after about 17 years of no contact, my mother just happened to reunite with her long-lost sister on a crowded Moscow metro train. You know, whenever I hear stories about two people that just happen to be in the same place at the same time, and it was just the perfect coincidence that they happened to meet each other, I'd love to just look at like a tracker of two people on a map throughout their life, and watching as they kind of do their own thing, and then maybe they come close. Maybe they've passed each other before in the past, but then you get to that one point where they come close to each other and it actually works. I don't know, just something weird to think about. When I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, I was out camping in my backyard and was watching the stars, hoping to see a meteor or two. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a satellite moving across the sky, traveling right to left. Out of the corner of my other eye, I see another satellite appear, moving from the horizon up. I see the speed they're both traveling, and realize that if they keep moving at their current speed and trajectory, at least to my eye, they're gonna hit each other. I keep watching them get closer and closer together, until finally they're about to cross paths. They intersect each other, and suddenly there's a quick, bright flash, and then neither of them are there anymore. I've often thought about what I saw. I know the odds that I watch two satellites collide and obliterate each other are basically zero, but I can't think of any other explanation for what I saw that night. Well, I guess maybe you were witnessing some secret technology that was shooting down a meteor that was heading towards Earth. This is about the time I peed all over myself while my husband had me pinned in a very compromising position. So we were wrestling on the bed. He pins me so that I'm basically folded in half on my back, with my butt up in the air and my knees are by my ears. I start laughing, then I start farting because I'm laughing, then I start laughing even harder because I farted. I'm still pinned down, not breathing from laughing so hard. My chest is burning. I need to stop laughing and take a breath, and right when I thought I was able to take a breath, my dog violates me by shoving his nose right where I farted from, and holds it there. The audacity of this action made me laugh even harder, and I pissed all over myself. You know, we're getting quite the variety of stories in this video. I wish I had enough to make this just a regular series, because I kinda like just how random and unpredictable it is. So I was a production assistant on a stop-motion kids show. A big part of my job was going out to purchase supplies the workshop needed to build the sets and puppets. Now the thing about these kind of workshops is they will use whatever works, and they often come up with unorthodox solutions as shortcuts. Like the time they sent me to a sex shop at 9:30 a.m. to buy thumb cuffs. Our cop puppet needed handcuffs, and they were the perfect size. But that didn't even compare to my most amusing/embarrassing supply run ever. The animation director came up to me one afternoon saying that he needed me to go to the drugstore to buy, and I quote, "the largest tube of KY jelly you can find." In stop motion, KY is used to simulate water, especially when it has to interact with the puppets. It stays put between frames and doesn't damage the paint. Anyways, our seamstress overheard our discussion and asked me while I was at the drugstore to get every tube of wet wipes they had, which is a safe way to clean the puppets and wardrobe, and we went through a lot of them. Next, the woman in charge of making all the limbs pipes up and asked me to get 6 pairs of white nylons while I'm at it. They hold the magnets in the feet. So this was my shopping list. 1 extra large tube of KY jelly, 6 pairs of white nylons, and every tube of wet wipes in the store. The look on the cashier's face when I dumped my basket on the counter was priceless, and for me, fairly embarrassing. Now come on, what kind of dirty ideas are running through your mind when you're thinking about this stuff? So about 5 years ago, I'm walking with a guy who I used to hang out with. We are crossing the street in the crosswalk, and he says, "Even if we get hit, it's not our fault." And we immediately get hit by a large truck. I fly through the air, which is actually liberating for someone with a fear of heights. I kept my eyes closed though. I hit the ground about 3 feet from hitting a large stone pillar that would have killed me. I stand up, check on my guy, walk to the guys who hit me, and say dead serious, "Is your truck okay?" I walked away with no injuries. The guy I hung out with had a cracked pelvic bone, but turned out to be a sex offender later, so, you know. I mean, it's kind of an interesting mindset to be walking out into a crosswalk and just being like, well, I have the right of way, and not paying any attention to what's going on around you. Man, actually my closest near-death experience was when I was just like on my way to work. I was riding my bike, and I'm sitting waiting at the crosswalk, and I look up and the green walk sign comes on. I was like, okay. So I start going, and right as I leave the sidewalk, I just hear screeching as a speeding car has to stop like 5 feet away from me in the middle of the intersection. And I'm just terrified, and I just keep on going. And once I got to work that day, I put in my 2-week notice. I wasn't going to risk my life for a minimum wage cashier job. When I was in college, I was dating a guy who lived in an off-campus apartment. One night when he was walking me down to the lobby to head home, there was a woman on the floor just outside the elevator. I remember she was wearing a skirt and her blouse was backwards. She was looking in her purse for her keys. We initially stepped around her to leave because we lived in a city with a lot of college students, so drunk folks on the ground aren't uncommon. But something felt wrong. I had turned around and went back to her and asked if she needed help. She was slurring really bad, talking about how she lived here and she needed her keys. I offered to help her get to her apartment and was eventually able to prop her up, get her in the elevator, and then down the hallway to the door number she kept repeating. I asked if she had roommates or a boyfriend, and she just kept saying, "He's in there." So I knocked, but no answer. I knocked super loud again, but no answer. The woman is now back on the floor and actually drooling and spitting like drunk folks do when they might throw up or have already thrown up. So she's exactly zero help. I end up going through her purse to try and find information or keys or something, because she hasn't even been able to tell me her name at this point. On top of her stuff in her purse is her underwear, balled up. I pushed it to the side and kept digging where I found the woman's work badge with her keys attached. I put the keys in the door to open it, but it doesn't work. She tells me over and over that those are the keys and they work, despite me showing her that they don't. I knock another time, but no answer. I go back into her purse to find a phone or something, and there is mail in there with her name on it, but a completely different address and a different borough of the city. My stomach drops. The woman is heavily intoxicated, her blouse is on backwards, her underwear is in her purse. She's been insisting that she came out of this apartment where her boyfriend lives, but nobody is answering, and she lives on the other side of town. Eventually, after probably 45 minutes, I'm able to get the woman to unlock her phone. Obviously, I don't know who any of the people in her contacts are, so I just call the one labeled Mom. After a few tries, Mom answers, clearly having been asleep. I explain that I'm a stranger, but I have her daughter with me, and I'm trying to get her home. Mom confirms the address on the envelope is where she lives. We talk for a couple minutes, and I give her my number. Next, I focus on getting a cab and bringing her home. I eventually get her inside, put her in bed, phone on the charger, and a couple bottles of water next to it in a trash bin. I send a text to her mom to let her know that she's home and in bed. The next day I'm on the bus between classes when Mom calls me. She thanks me for helping her daughter last night, and they wanted to let me know what happened. The woman went on a date with a guy she met on an app. They went and had 2 drinks at a restaurant, but the woman became insanely drunk very fast. It turns out that when she went to the restroom, he had drugged her drink when it came back to the table. He took her back to his apartment and assaulted her, then dumped her in the lobby where I found her. The door we were pounding on was the rapist's door. The woman didn't remember hardly anything the next day after the drink, but she was sore and smelled latex when she went to the bathroom. If I could have taken her to the hospital instead of just taking her home, she could have received treatment faster and had a report written. That day I wrote down in a Word document everything I remember from the night before in excruciating detail. I told the mom that I did this and was willing to testify or talk to police or do anything needed of me. She said she would tell her daughter, but she just wants to move on. I texted the mom for a few months later to ask how her daughter is doing and reminded her I'm still able to provide a statement or anything else. That's the last time I talked to her. That was years ago, but whenever I get a new computer, I make sure to transfer that Word document to a safe place on it, just in case they ever came back and needed it. I mean, that sounds like kind of a crazy adventure, but sometimes, even though you're putting in so much time and effort to try and help somebody, sometimes they just don't want the help. It was like one time I was riding the train and I noticed somebody had left their purse behind and they left it on the train. So I decided to take it home. I looked in it and I found the ID. I found the person on Facebook. I tried adding them. I tried sending them messages, but they were just ignoring all of it, just not responding to anything. So then after a few days, I just take the purse, I go back to the train, and I just leave it on the train and forget about it. I guess some people just can't be helped. One night on my way home after work, on an especially freezing night, I stopped for gas and was approached by a homeless man. Called himself Miami. I typically hand over spare money to homeless people and try to make a little small talk even if I don't have cash on me. I think it's important to treat people like people. I won't go into too much detail, but after forking over a few dollars, I ended up driving this fellow all around town. He smoked crack in my car. He tried to entice me with promises of women in some cheap hotel. He asked me to give some other homeless person a ride. And on it went, until like 4 or 5 a.m., when he went into a hotel room. I took his plastic bags out of my car and neatly put them to the side, and left before he came back out. In my defense, he was in there for over half an hour before I left. The entire encounter was pretty unpleasant from beginning to end, but for some reason I remember it fondly. I know he thinks he was taking advantage of me, and I shudder when I imagine the girls he was wanting me to meet. But it was cold, he had absolutely nothing, and I helped alleviate that at least for one night. I don't talk about it because I don't want people to think I'm trying to brag or anything like that. But it did happen, and I often catch myself wondering how Miami the crack-smoking homeless man is faring out on these streets. You know, there's a reason they often suggest you don't pick up hitchhikers. Picking up a homeless person's probably worse on average. Just be lucky you were able to get him out of your car and you could actually leave. This one's a bit odd and kind of gross. This is how I learned a new medical term, scarred my family, and started a long health journey. So while I was in college, I went a week without eating or going to the bathroom. My schedule, overload of credits, and 2 jobs. I honestly didn't notice. I was stopped in my tracks by a phone call from my dad. With a shaky voice, he said, "Hey, your great-grandma passed away this morning. She was dropped while being loaded into the ambulance, and her heart stopped. She's gone." My great-grandmother was an amazing person. I should have told the story about her and the spirits, maybe another time. She was fascinating and had a mind like a steel trap. I miss her. So that weekend, I go home for the funeral. At the wake, my mom asked when the last time I ate was. I didn't remember. She made me eat a sandwich. It felt like torture, and I didn't know why. A short while later, I began sweating profusely, and got very weak. I said I didn't feel well, and my brother took me to my parents' house. I immediately fell asleep in my bed. At about 2 a.m., I shoot straight up in bed. We all know the feeling, I need to throw up 30 seconds ago and have 3 seconds to make a 25-foot dash to the bathroom. I couldn't hold back as I entered the smallish basement bathroom. My 2 siblings' bedrooms are right next to the bathroom. So I threw up hard into my mouth, but something was wrong. I tasted iron, and some liquid went between my fingers. My eyes are still blurry from just waking up, and I began vomiting the most painful vomiting imaginable. I'm practically screaming. My eyes start to focus on my hands, which is trying desperately to grasp the edge of the toilet. Is that blood? I begin to look around, and there is blood, everywhere. My sister, hearing this, had to run to get my parents without looking into the bathroom. When my mom opened the door, she immediately saw blood all over the white linoleum floor leading to me. So me, slumped over with my head partially into the toilet, no longer moving. Blood all over the toilet and spattered on the wall. I suddenly started gasping and coughing. I had blacked out. I began throwing up again and turned to my mom, and she was horrified. I was whiter than printer paper and had blood all over me, running out of my nose and mouth. "Help me, please." I gasped, weakly pleading. "Am I going to die?" Then I blacked out again. I woke up to my mom and sister sobbing as my dad was cleaning me up with a blood-soaked white towel. The towel was dripping red. My eyes were blurry and I said, "Hospital." We get to the ER and I was finished with throwing up. I couldn't walk, I was so weak. The doctor was beyond perplexed. They did scans, tests, but they couldn't get any blood from me for hours. They hit a vein but couldn't get enough. It sucked. The doctor finally said, "Mesenteric lymphadenitis. Your lymphodes did their job gathering all the bad stuff, but stopped doing their job and discharging it. As for the vomiting blood, honestly I'm at a loss. Had 4 people not witnessed it and brought in cell phone pictures, I wouldn't have believed it. But your tests are indicating a lot of blood loss." Never did find out why the blood, although years later in the ER again, I did have a slow bleed in my intestinal area. Also unexplained. On a more sad note, I missed the funeral. Well, this guy sure likes to put in a lot of details about how gruesome it was, but didn't actually give a real explanation as to how going without eating for a week can cause you to vomit blood. I mean, that just seems like a really odd symptom to have for that. I live in Maine. My brother is a hobbyist photographer. So one Christmas, he gave my girlfriend and I some nice prints of some photos he took of us. He threw in a few scratch tickets to fill out the gift bag. Lucky for us, we won $30,000 on one of the scratch tickets. We used most of it to pay off the interest on our student loans, but used the rest for a vacation to Ireland, a place my girlfriend and I always wanted to visit. It was amazing. Flash forward a few years, my brother, who lives in DC, has a new girlfriend. She spent a year studying abroad in Ireland back in college, so we chatted a bit about how much we both love the country. The conversation moved on to something else, as conversations tend to do. However, someone pipes in later, "Hey, do you know that brother's girlfriend spent a year in Ireland?" Says, "Oh yeah, we talked about that earlier, so cool." Now back on the subject of Ireland, we started to discuss some more obscure things we did on the trip. I bring up this stand-up comedy show we found one night, in the basement of some pub. Really small space, probably 20 people in the audience at most. My brother's girlfriend said that she had been to the show once, too. I started remembering some traits of the comedians. One was a black Scottish dude, another was a young man with the side of her head shaved. The MC was even funnier than the main acts. Her jaw dropped. She remembered those same comedians too. I'm thinking that it's way too much of a coincidence. So I looked up the old event schedules to see if those acts performed on multiple dates. Nope, only once. What a crazy coincidence. My girlfriend and I were at the same 20-person basement comedy show as my brother's future girlfriend, in completely different country, on a trip that was funded by a scratch ticket from said brother. Pretty neat. I guess it is a small world after all. So I would occasionally write post-it notes to myself if I was super drunk and something absurd happened. My writing is illegible on most days. I had a note forever in my wallet that looked like I was saying, I am a something, eat something, cucumber whore. It kept me up one night and trying to figure out what it said. About a year later it dawned on me. I saw a man eat a cucumber whole. Some dude at a bar was eating a cucumber like an apple, and was so incensed and defensive by the question that I decided to stay away and document it for human history. So combative, yet being so unapologetically human. It's been probably 10 years. Yeah, I suppose that it would be pretty absurd. I don't know why anyone would want to eat a full cucumber. When me and my slightly older cousin were kids, they tried to convince me of falsehoods all the time. I was, and still kind of am, extremely gullible. I fell for, hey, gullible is on the ceiling, more than once. One day when I was around 11, the elder of my cousins was talking about how he was joining a lacrosse team. I had no idea what that was, so I asked him. He explained the rules and the tools of the game. I was certain that he was lying to me, that it was another prank. There was no way people ran around with small baskets on sticks, throwing and catching hard balls. That's insanity. So I smirked and said, sure, and went on my way. For the next several years, whenever someone mentioned lacrosse, I'd snicker, thinking I was privy to a joke. When I was around 17, a friend of mine mentioned that she was going to a lacrosse game. I laughed and said, kind of annoyed, yeah, I know the joke, you can drop it. Lacrosse isn't real. She was so confused and looked at me like I was crazy. She insisted it was in fact real. I insisted it wasn't. We looked it up online. Sure enough, completely real. I was utterly shocked, and way more than a little embarrassed. Especially when I thought back to all my weird responses to mentions of lacrosse. Well, when you can't trust the people around you, you never know what's real and what isn't. Well, that's going to be all for part 2 of these stories. I'll probably do one more part of just these random ones, and then we'll probably go back to just a bunch of regular topical videos. But that's all for now. I will talk to you guys next time.